Thanks, Joe. Next up, we have someone who is known as an internet pioneer. He actually helped coin the phrase, the digital divide, Mr. Larry Irving.
Thank you, Francella. Thank you, Next Century Cities. When you hear the term internet pioneer, it means you're old. And since a little bit later this year, I'll finally qualify for Medicare, I guess I am actually old. I only have a few minutes, and I'm actually timing myself, and I want to talk about a few things. I want to give you a sense of the digital divide then and now, but I also want to give you a sense of where the digital divide comes from, how it happened. I was born in the projects in Brooklyn, New York. I worked for a congressman named Mickey Leland in the 1980s, who was from inner city Houston, one of the tougher towns in the country to connect, and a lot of low-income people, a lot of immigrants. In the 1980s, we did a survey of who had telephones in New York City, where I lived, and in Houston, where Mickey was a congressman. And we found that for black folks, for brown folks, for poor people, 40%, 50% of those households didn't have a phone in their home. They're going down to the payphone, and I remember growing up in New York, in Brooklyn, and seeing people in the building we lived in go down into the corner to the payphone to use a phone because they didn't have one in their home. So when this internet thing happened, I was blessed to be part of the Clinton-Obama transition team. And I was working with people like Ron Brown, who was from Harlem, and Al Gore, who was from Tennessee, and of course Bill Clinton's from Hope, Arkansas. And all of us had experience in our own lives of people who had grown up with less. And we knew this internet was going to be more. And we couldn't have a system in which some people had access to everything that the internet provided, and some people had no access to that internet. So early on, even during the transition, Mr. Clinton and Mr. Gore were talking about connecting every school, every hospital, every library to the internet. But most people, you got to remember, in 1993, when I joined the Clinton-Gore administration, there were 15 million people on the internet. Most of them were academics or hobbyists. It was thought of by many people as the next citizen band radio, CB radio. Some of you of a certain age remember CB radio. It was sort of something that wouldn't really happen. It was not going to mean anything for most of us. But others had a vision of what it could be. And we knew that if we connected everyone, we'd do something meaningful. But what struck me, I think, and where I started really getting involved in this question of making sure that we had something, had a term we could use, was I was with Ron Brown and Jonathan Salitz here from Commerce. We both worked with Ron back in the day. And Ron and I went up to Cupertino, California, which is the home of Apple Computer. There's a table like that, and there were 8 kids sitting around that table. Almost none of them were children of color. And they were accessing all the joys in the world sitting around that table. And then we went down to, I'll never forget it, Thurgood Marshall High School, which is in Hunters Point, which is black and brown. Most of the kids were on free lunch programs. And those kids had no idea that a technology called the internet existed. And then my former boss, Ed Markey, was talking to me about the internet when I was going all this excited. He said, Larry, you got to think in Boston, Massachusetts, the most impressive most of these kids see in Boston, Massachusetts is the metal detector. They never see a computer. And in my high school in Queens County, New York, where I grew up, those kids had never seen it. This is 1995, 96. So that's when we started doing these surveys. And the first survey is 25 years this year. First digital divide survey. And what did we find? That poor people, that people of color, that immigrants, that low-income people, that elderly people were not connected to the internet. And we knew we had to do something about that. And we were connecting schools, we were connecting hospitals, we were connecting libraries. Every classroom was connected by the Clinton administration by the year 2000. We were going into rural communities and explaining to people what this meant. I was talking to a young lady and a gentleman from Huntsville, Alabama. During my days in the Clinton administration, I gave at least one speech in every state in this country to talk about why the internet mattered to that state and to the people in that state. So where are we now? 25 years later, what's it look like? It's good news and bad news. Good news, about 90% of the people in this country have access to the internet. A third of the people in this country use the internet almost all day, every day. They're connected all day long. But who's not connected? Well, my cohort's not connected. Folks who are Social Security eligible or older, a third of them have no access to the internet. For people with less than a high school education, 29 to 30% of them don't have access to the internet. The homework gap, which Jessica Rosenworcel will talk about, is a huge problem. 1 out of 7 kids go home to no broadband. Jeffrey Starr has been working hard with Jessica on those, and I'm looking forward to hearing his comments because there are people who care about that. And what I love about this session, it's the bipartisan technology coalition, because there used to be a time when telecommunications was nonpartisan. And I think we're rapidly moving away from that, and that is a major problem for this country. I only have a little bit of time left, so let me talk about what I saw up in New York. I gave a speech at City University in New York, and there's this beautiful report that just came out from the Chief Technology or Chief Information Officer in New York that you should read. No matter what city you're from, you should read it because it has a lot of smart things in it, and it talks a lot about the problems that we're all here to talk about today. When I went up to New York, what scared me, there are more people in New York who don't have broadband access than there are people in Houston, Texas. Think about that. There are more households in New York that don't have broadband than there are households in Houston, Texas. When I went to City University in New York, and I was talking to professors up there, and I'm looking at these beautiful students, kids who are like me, who grew up in the same neighborhoods I grew up with, and I'm talking to professors who say they have kids in New York City, the only time they have access. At the City University of New York, 250,000 kids go to that university, another 250,000 continuing education people, 500,000 people access that university. And there are students there who the only time they have access to broadband is on the campus of that university. There are other students in college who are doing their term papers on their smartphones. This is not a country that this is not the country any of us imagine. As much as we've done, we've got so much more to do. In the time I've got remaining, let me talk about a couple of things. We need to make sure that we have holistic approaches. Let me be very straightforward. We've got a situation right now where there are 3 times as many people in urban and suburban America who don't have access to the internet as there are people in rural America. But here in Washington, almost all of the discussion about the digital divide is about rural America. In the next couple of weeks, the Federal Communications Commission is going to talk about a $20 billion program to connect rural America, and I am all for that. When you go down to Pikesville, Kentucky, when you go to Cut and Shoot, Texas, when you go into North Dakota, when you go to Indian reservations, and I've been to all of those places, and look in the eyes of a mother, she wants the same thing for her son and daughter that anybody in New York or Chicago or Arlington County or Austin, Texas wants. But we can't spend $20 billion on some Americans and almost nothing federally on other Americans when there's 3 times as many of these urban Americans. And so that troubles me greatly. We also need to fight redlining. The 5G fight is going to be a major fight. I grew up in New York City when cable was coming to New York, and I remember living in Queens, and my mom and dad were divorced, and I'd go up to Manhattan to watch the Knicks because there was no cable in Queens. There was a time when people actually wanted to watch the Knicks. That is not that time now. But back in the day when it was Willis Reed and Walt Frazier, you'd actually want to see them. We would get on a bus or get on a train and go to Manhattan. Well, 5G, the cities have been stripped of their power to make sure that 5G is deployed equitably. This is a fight worth having. It is a fight I'm going to try to help fight with you, but please think about redlining. Consumers should not have to give up their privacy in order to get access to the internet. And that's another discussion we have to have. Free does not mean free. If free means you have to give up your privacy. So let's have that conversation as a nation. But the main term I want you to think about is don't let this become a regional fight. Don't let this become urban versus suburban versus rural. Let's all work together to find solutions. And think about the concept of meaningful connectivity. Connections that are useful and empowering. That comes from Tim Berners-Lee. He and his group, the World Wide Web Foundation, are talking globally about the concept of meaningful connectivity. And it matters to me because what it means is if you're in West Africa and they'll say you're connected, and you're in Western Europe and they say you're connected, but in Western Europe you've got 7 times the speed and you're on a laptop, and in West Africa you may be on a mobile device that's going on equivalent of a dial-up network. The same kinds of things are happening in America where some people are just on a mobile phone, and some by choice, but some because they can't afford anything else, and others, like me, have 7 devices at home and carry another 3 around with them wherever they go on the streets. We have to make sure that every person in this country, and as we get to 5G, as we get to AI, 80% of the jobs that high school graduates are going to need require some understanding of technology, but these kids can go home and don't have access to this. I'm a member of the board of ENA. I'm the member of the board of the Texas Tribune. I'm a member of the board of Schools Household Library, Broadband Coalition, Shelby. All of those institutions are working every day to have these good conversations, to have these important conversations. I want to hear your stories because over the next year, I'm going to try to do everything I can to make meaningful connectivity, not just the term that I'm using, Tim Berners-Lee is using, but everybody in this country is using. We've got a lot of work left to do as a nation, but there shouldn't be any child product of public schools, public libraries, and public investment. We are not going to solve the problem we have for what we regard to our senior citizens. We're not going to get an accurate census. We're not going to have the kinds of jobs with the kinds of skill sets we need to compete in a global economy unless all of us connected. The digital divide mattered 25 years ago. It matters more today. Thank you very much.